Welcome to ¿Qué pasa? HSIs, a podcast dedicated to everything Hispanic serving institutions. I'm your host, Dr. Gina Ann Garcia, bringing you the news on what's happening in HSIs. Join us as we explore the history and evolution of HSIs, culturally relevant and liberatory practices, current and emerging research with HSIs, and the policies that shape servingness.
Saludos, HSI familia, and welcome back to ¿Qué pasa? HSIs. On today's show, we are learning with Lorena González, who identifies as a Michoacana, Purepecha, Mexica Indigenous cisgender mujer. Lorena's lived experiences of growing up in San Francisco's Tenderloin and Mission District have been at the center of and informed her 25 years as a community college educator and scholar activist for equity, racial, and social justice. Currently, Lorena is a tenured faculty member in counseling and Raza Studies at Contra Costa College in occupied lands of the Confederate villages of Latine and Muwekma Ohlone tribe. Lorena received double bachelor's degrees from UC Berkeley in psychology and Chicano studies with a minor in education, as well as a master's in counseling psychology from Notre Dame, then Moore University. Most recently, Lorena earned 2 postgraduate certificates in student affairs and higher education administration from UC Berkeley Extension and ethnic studies from San Francisco State University. Currently, Lorena is an active member of Colegas, a professional association for Latinx professionals in California community colleges, and the California HSI Leadership Network. I'm excited to talk to Lorena about some of my favorite topics, including decolonizing HSIs and servingness in community colleges. Lorena, thank you for joining us on ¿Qué pasa? HSIs, where we talk about all things HSIs. But before we talk about HSIs, let's learn about you. So go ahead and start by telling us about your servingness journey.
Let's do this. My servingness journey began long before I was even born. I say this because I'm the maternal great-granddaughter of Francisco Luna, who courageously and he proudly was in full servingness for his pueblo. He was fighting for tierra and libertad in the Mexican Revolution. I have a picture of him, of my tatabuelo Francisco, and he had his Pancho Villa, Emiliano Zapata bigote, his sombrero, and the rifle, and those billet belts that were across the chest of that era. And he's proudly sitting on this horse, and the horse was gifted to him in service for fighting for the revolution. And so I have this picture in my office just as much as in my home to remind me of a legacy of courageously and proudly serving for your familia, for your gente, your community, your land, for land of the people, and at a deeper level, being in service for dignity, for justice and liberation. And so that always comes to me, and it's very clear from this image of my tatabuelo that it comes from and for the people. And so his servingness spirit definitely continued with my mom, who, along with my father, were hotel service workers in San Francisco's Union Square at the Grand Hyatt. There, my mom cleaned hotel rooms, and my father was a dishwasher. And through my mom, they were really both actively engaged in their union, and they participated in a lot of local 2 union strikes. And I have very vivid memories of being in the stroller on the picket line with them in the city multiple times with them as they were on strike, whether it was for fair wages or healthcare, working conditions. And so, I remember they would even go to non-union hotels in support of servingness to those workers in those hotels that and supporting their unionizing efforts. So that's kind of on the like with the institution, but on a familial level, I witnessed servingness continue with my family and how there was always food to eat, even if it was frijoles de la olla, right? Nunca faltaba a place to stay. There was always clothes on our backs, regardless of how poor we were. Regardless of how recently arrived familia from Mexico was, there was always a place to stay, a safe place to land, right? Support to finding a job was provided, and I think back to it's the whole mutualista, right? And the mutual aid concept in action. And I've lost count of how many aunts and uncles my parents supported and getting jobs and purchasing their own homes in the U.S. once they were established. So it was always you get yours to then support the next, right? I grew up watching mi tia Belia, which is my mom's sister and a second mom to me. She demonstrated advocacy and servingness to everyone. En el pueblo back in Michoacana, era la madrina de todo el pueblo, right? Because of that spirit. And my servingness highlight story for her, que en paz descanses, in Michoacán, the government was doing this program this cooperative program for self-sufficiency. And so my tia hustled and did what she had to do, and she didn't skip a beat. And she started a cooperative in the pueblo where cattle was provided to single mothers so that they can provide self-sufficiency for themselves and their children, to make cheese and sell the milk and things like that. So growing up, definitely servingness wasn't something I necessarily saw people do, but it was more who we were. And then for me personally, like many first generation in the US, first children born, like we're translating for our parents, right? We're translating documents. We're going to hospitals, making, doctor's appointments and translating for the doctors and things like that. And, of course, once I became the first in my family to attend college, then I became the family, mija, come help me with this, And so, I in retrospect, I can definitely see the thread of that servingness continue in education as a student, right? In high school, I was a peer mentor. I was an associated student. In an undergrad, I was heavily involved in Raza Recruitment and Retention Center in UC Berkeley. And then when my career, I say that starting point for my career in community college was at the Boys and Girls Club, and I worked there during the summers of my undergrad. And so even when I transitioned to the community college, I always intentionally sought out programs that served students that reflected my own lived experiences, whether it was an EOPS or the Puente Project or working with basic skills or dreamers, rising scholars, right? MESA. So all of those programs were always intentional for me. And then in terms of attending, I definitely did not attend an HSI at UC Berkeley in the mid-90s. Let me tell you, I remember feeling just so out of place. And mind you, I went right out of high school. And so just feeling so out of place. And it took me a really long time after enrolling before I saw anyone in classes or walking around campus that I felt looked like me, that I felt I could go up to and talk to or that even saw myself reflected in them. There was no sense of belonging on the campus or welcoming that I could relate to within the institution. And mind you, they had the club rush and all of that, but it was nothing that I felt like that was centered to me and my identity. And it's even in this experience at the institutional level at Berkeley in the mid-90s, I can reflect now and know that for a fact, I, and along with other UCB, Raza undergrads, past and even present, we found our servingness through who we now know to be La Mamá de los Pollitos, which was Lupe Gallegos. And like many others, I eventually found my way to Lupe's office where I finally felt I belonged. I immediately felt at home in her ternura of, hey, mija, even without knowing my name or who I was, as soon as I walked in. Straight Angela Venezuela's cariño theory and practice, right? Before we even knew that was a theory, she immediately, I reflected and saw myself in her Spanglish, in the colors and the artwork in her office. She immediately connected me to Raza orgs on campus, where eventually that's where I found my place and how I found my place of servingness and community through the Raza Recruitment and Retention Center. And so that really stuck with me because while the institution was not an HSI, there again, individuals, and there were pockets of spaces on campus where we took it upon ourselves to fill that void of servingness for the institution. And it's, again, another reminder of for us, by us, in terms of that consciousness of HSI consciousness, it first came into my consciousness around 2015-ish when I was the Puente Counselor Coordinator at College of San Mateo. And CSM had received their HSI designation for the first time. I had no idea what that was at the time, but as the Puente Counselor Coordinator, I and others began going to statewide trainings on HSI, and I was invited by the president to be part of CSM's HSI Advisory Committee upon receiving the first HSI grant. It was in this capacity that the seeds of HSI servingness within an HSI institution were really planted for me, and so continued my servingness journey. That was, I could sense it evolving and shifting focus to the ethical and moral role and responsibility and the obligation of the HSI institutions of schooling to have specific and intentional HSI servingness and strategically utilizing the millions of dollars received in government grants off of the mere enrollment of our Raza students. My consciousness for HSI definitely continued to develop further when I accepted the HSI STEM counselor position at CCC. And well, I had already been very familiar with statewide programs and trainings through EOPSM project and Puente. The HSI STEM position, counselor position, really provided additional training and research conferences at a national level. You know, that was what got me connected through Haku and ASI. And that's where I definitely began to inform my advocacy from a national perspective to the local level, and knowing that it was backed by national research and data and best practices, and that it's utilized at HSIs, not only across the state of California, but across the country. And didn't even know Puerto Rico had HSIs, right? And so for me, it provided another layer to my servingness. And if I remember correctly, I think that's where I first met you, was at one of those conferences, you know, and so definitely it's the servingness journey is exactly that. It's a journey, right? There's an awake, you know, and that journey takes a lot of different levels, but definitely going from the statewide training to the national level, definitely deepened my understanding for servingness.
Ooh, that was a lot. I love it. You started all the way back with your family and through your own consciousness around activism. I love that, right? That like even being out on the picket line with your parents, right? Like, because you are such a revolutionary. Now I know why, right? It's in your blood. Your ancestors gave you that, which is beautiful.
Ooh, wait till what's coming.
All right, all right. And shout out to Lupe. Oh, she's so beautiful. That's so amazing. Yeah,
yes,
yeah, at Berkeley,
yes.
at UC Berkeley. She's still doing her thing over at
She
UC
still
Berkeley.
is, absolutely.
She embodies servingness for sure. And as UC Berkeley becomes an HSI, they're definitely leaning on her, right? To be one of those people, like to elevate that, right? That like she knows what servingness is.
Exactly.
And we have to acknowledge that. So but I think going with that thread and thinking about how the people who you interact with on a campus, their identities matter, right, to students. And I know your identity matters to you a lot. So talk to us about how you use your racial, ethnic, indigenous, gender, linguistic identities in your own work as a faculty member at an HSI.
No, definitely. And, you know, and these identities, they definitely come from my lived experience. And they are absolutely foundational and to the core of what informs my work as a faculty member at HSI. And a little bit before the how is a little bit more context. And so I explain, you know, I live my lived experience in nurturing my identities. I lived in San Francisco's Tenderloin and the Mission. And I also say I grew up in Michoacana. And so in that respect, I'm going to be a bit deeper in the essence that I had what I can now say we call in academia, you know, a transnational upbringing where school was in San Francisco. I'm in the city, I'm in the TL, I'm in the Mission during the school year. And then the summers and then vacations, I'm in Tierra Caliente, Michoacan with my abuelita, right? Like straight rancho living, like we're waking up with the gallos to go take the nixtamal, right? And then we're washing our clothes in the river and I'm bringing back water in a cántaro, you know, on my head, you know, and there was always a strong presence and still is a strong presence of Purepecha indigenous culture and revivement of language and clothing and tradition, right? And so that was my lived experience, right? And so for me, seeing people wearing huaraches was not a big thing. And I remember the first time I went to Guadalajara, even in Mexico, and I'm looking around and I'm asking, where are the indigenous people? Because my only understanding of Mexico was Michoacan, which is very unique, and especially my area. And so again, these identities formed by my transnational, you know, San Francisco, the Tenderloin, the Mission, Michoacan lived experience, it absolutely informs it. And I think about being an HSI faculty member in a low-income, urban, multi-ethnic, racial, cultural, multilingual, high immigrant student population like CC is. You know, we're coming from very similar intersectional backgrounds and communities, and I definitely see myself reflected in every student I encounter. It's the Enlakesh, right? The indigenous Mayan philosophy of you are my other me. In the same way, manifesting the African philosophy of Ubuntu, right? Like I am because we are. And so this is foundational for me in my role of intersectionality of the lived experiences of being poor and growing up in the city and in the Mission and the TIA, right? Like those are it. despite, you know, even with the population at CCC, we're at 47% Raza and 19% API and 14% Afram. We have a huge Arab population and Yemenis population. We have, so there's a lot of, you know, a lot of what I saw in the community in San Francisco growing up. You know, another way that these identities inform my work as a faculty member is linguistically and my interpersonal relationship building skills, you know, both with students and colleagues alike. It ain't even an afterthought for me to mix in urban slang and Spanish and the few Nahuatl and Purepecha words I know. Within my counseling sessions with students and lectures in my classes and discussions in college meetings, committees, or conferences I attend, I can't tell you how liberating it feels to resist conformity and unapologetically bring your authentic self within the U.S. settler colonial institutions and structures that weren't even designed for us to begin with anyways. You know, we weren't meant to be included. And so for me, this is part of what I do within my sphere of influence as a way of decentering U.S. colonial ways of being and linguistically reclaiming space for myself, even within the institution. The identities are the framework and the perspective that inform every aspect of my curriculum, my counseling practices, my teaching pedagogy, the intentionality of the committees and projects I dedicate time and energy to, the comments, the input, the feedback at all college days, you know, campus town halls, my role, I'm on academic senate, right? They hear my identities, right? And when I was counseling department chairs, on the hiring committees I'm in, I'm on the Achieving the Dream core team. And so for me, bringing these identities to the forefront is paramount if we're really going to talk about servingness and we're really going to address an institution that has never served the students that we have. You know, and you mentioned earlier in terms of my background, you know, definitely my indigenous Purepecha people of Michoacán, you know, they were protected their people even from the Mexica warriors, and that's saying something, you know. And mi tatabuelo and his horse in the Mexican Revolution, you know, my parents local too, mi tia Belia and her cattle cooperative, you know, for single moms, you know, the Juarez and the Purepecha women of Cheran in 2011 who single-handedly took out the carteles in Michoacán and the government. And so, no, we're going to go back to old ways. And they called out their men and be like, no que tan hombres, a ver, ¿por qué no? You know, it was the women, you know. And so this is my lineage. This is where I come from. And these are the teachings and the philosophies that at the core of who I am, what I bring into every academic space and committee, meeting, conference I enter. And that definitely informed my work in advocacy as a faculty member. You know, that spirit of resistance, the resiliency of our people and communities, the no justice, no peace, right? And speaking up against institutional campuses injustices, which we like to rename inequities in academia, right? But it's the same thing. Right? We just, you know, we want to just feel better about what we're calling it. So we'll call it inequities, but we're really talking about injustices happening. And so the sí se puede, along with aquí estamos y no nos vamos, you know, absolutely goes hand in hand with student advocacy for HSI servingness within U.S. settler colonial institutions of schooling on stolen indigenous land. And let's pause there, right? Stolen indigenous lands. And so this informs the critical reflection provided in holding the institution accountable to its stated missions, its vision and diversity statement, the equity reports, the HSI grants received, right? The HSI programming and services, right? And when decisions and actions, they don't align with what's stated as an HSI campus, yet we continue to regurgitate student success, and yet still face the never-ending obstacles, right? When we're talking about intentional servingness for Latinx students on HSI campuses. You know, in this respect, my identities definitely inform those critical questions, and many times that lead to the continuously avoided, but also necessary and long overdue conversations regarding intentional HSI servingness in relation to Raza students on an HSI. You know, lastly, I want to add two identities that definitely inform my work as a faculty member that are very personal to me because, and those are being a mama and a community member. And so you see, I'm I not only work at an HSI, but I'm also the parent of students at an HSI. Not only do I work at an HSI, but I'm also a community member living in the same community served by the HSI. My middle son attended CCC and transferred to Sacramento State, where he's at now. And my baby girl just started at CCC this past fall. And so while both were and are part of the Puente program, there is nothing at a campus-wide level and an institutional level that made them aware nor have any sense that CCC was a designated HSI. Very, very similar to my UC Berkeley undergraduate experience. Except CCC has been an HSI for over 10 years now, and we're on our third HSI grant at $12+ million, right? How is this acceptable that students don't even know, they can't even tell, have no inclination that they are enrolled at an HSI institution? What that means as an identity, that there's, what the servingness is, nor many of our employees, because there are still nothing indicating so. I'm also part of that very same community that we as an institution say we want to engage and connect with. And so there is most definitely a layer of mama bear and community bear that for sure informs my work as a faculty member for advancing HSI servingness. Because the community is my community. It's where I've raised my children and gone to school. They've gone to school, and where we go to church, and we have carne asadas at the marina, I don't just go to and from an HSI for work. I live here. My children, my extended family are here. We are part of the shifting demographic, both on campus and off campus, that they're struggling with. And so for me, that also comes into place because there's that protectiveness of my children and my community and so that's definitely in there.
Yeah. Beautiful. Oh, you just said so many things. I was over here snapping and clapping. But even that last piece was so powerful because people rarely bring in, right, their mama identity, their identities as a community. But I talk about HSIs being a reflection of the communities all the time, especially a community college, right? A community college is like the community is right there, right?
It's in that, yes.
Literally, the students that you're serving are the ones that, if you live in that community, they're your neighbors, right? Like,
just go down 23rd, go down San Pablo Avenue and Rumrill, you'll see them. Like, that's who we're serving.
Yep. And they're serving you when you go, into the stores or whatever, right? Like, like it's the part of the community, and HSIs haven't engaged in that yet, right? Besides individuals like you, right? The full campus hasn't fully engaged in the practice of like serving a community. We're actually serving a community. And if we could serve the community better, we would serve the students better.
Absolutely. Right? And I think that that's one of the things with academia, that academia is so much in theory, right? Theory and jargon and vernacular in the latest, right? Like, right now it's decolonizing, right? Where before it was institutional racism, and then it's DEI, like it shifts, right? And so I think academia grabs onto that, but then the praxis piece, they don't know what to do with it. And especially if they're not from the community that they serve, if they only go to and from work, right? And, it's easy for the institution to become its own bubble, disconnected from what's happening around it at a community level.
And campuses sometimes look like that. Like nobody even wants to go on the campus. It doesn't even look inviting, right? Like I don't belong there, right? Like it's not part of the community. It just happens to be in the community.
Yes, that is so key. Yes.
Yes.
Mic drop right there.
So you mentioned decolonizing. So let's talk about that, because I know we wanted to have a conversation about that. And as you know, I've written about it. And to your point, from a very theoretical perspective, right? Like decolonizing HSIs, that article has been downloaded many times. It was published in 2018. The new book, Transforming HSI, was based on that book. And the idea is there, but it's so theoretical that I actually stopped using it, right? I was like, what does it look like in practice? Yeah, like how do we actually do it in practice? So I wanted to ask you, what are your thoughts? Because I know you believe in that idea as well, right? Like the idea that we could decolonize HSIs, but what does it look like to disrupt colonial logics in practice.
Ooh, yes, let's talk about disrupting colonial logics and
Yes.
practice. Yes, like, okay, so, first and foremost, I think it's really important in decolonizing HSI that it comes with the acknowledgement, right? The understanding, the acceptance that every single HSI campus in a U.S. settler colonial institution is a settler colonial institution, structure, and system occupying indigenous stolen land. There's reminders galore with the U.S. flags raised, right, on our campuses, to the signing of oath of a loyalty that we have to sign when we get hired, right? This is the decolonial truth-telling creation story of every HSI in the United States of America. Secondly, comes the acknowledgement and acceptance and understand that all U.S. institutions of schooling were created with the intentional exclusion of women and all BIPOC students. And then from this historical reality, foundational reality, right, our mere existence in HSIs is disrupting that colonial logic and practice, right? Because we were never welcome nor ever intended to be included to begin with, yet here we are. Thirdly comes the acknowledgement and the acceptance and understanding that U.S. institutions of schooling are microcosms of larger U.S. society and not only impacted, but intertwined with the roles that race, that class, that power and privilege play, as well as in the lives of our students, their families, and the communities we serve. What happens in the larger U.S. society absolutely underlines and is reflected in what happens in U.S. schooling, and we can't separate that as much as we want. And we're seeing that with the Palestinian genocide happening right now, right? Schools want to separate it, and there is no, right? It's intertwined what happens in society and globally. Lastly, decolonizing HSIs requires moving beyond the theoretical frameworks we were talking about, right? And the institutional statements and the resolutions and that contain the performative and rhetoric and the academic vernacular jargon, right, of the times, and right now we're on equity and decolonizing, and DEI is seeing its way out a little bit, right? And we shifted to anti-proxenism, and all of that's included in all of our missions, but in practice, right, there's nothing, right? And so for me, one example I give is with the land acknowledgement, right? Example, the land acknowledgement wave, I call it, that hit U.S. higher education, with including the reading at the beginning of many campus academic spaces, And as a land acknowledgement alone, with everything else as a standalone, and with everything else in the institution being business as usual, can we really speak of decolonizing the space just because a land acknowledgement was read, right? Or is it reflective of an institutional performative practice, okay? Versus from a decolonial framework that interrupts, disrupts, transforms the institution beyond the reading of a land acknowledgement by intentional and specific and institutional actions, programming, and services in support of our Native and Indigenous students, right? For example, are we disaggregating enrollment data for Native and Indigenous students on our campus, in our feeder high schools, in our local service area? Are we providing free tuition and books for Native and Indigenous students, right? Are we identifying a lead person on campus for Native and Indigenous student program and support in a student space? Are we making connections with the local tribal community members within our HSI service area? And my wish list top item is, are we even having conversations about rematriating a portion of our campus land to the stewardship and care of the local Native tribe? And so for us, that would be Socorro Land Trust with Auntie Karina Gold, right? And she's doing amazing work in the Bay Area. And I know even at there's different places that are putting up the Indigenous Friends of the Muwekma, and the Lisjan have their land, right? And the city of Albany now has you're entering Lisjan territory, right? You could play the Shumi text, right? And I think of the space as like, replanting of native plants, of bee tracking, embracing it with environmental justice, especially in low-income communities like Richmond, San Pablo, and we have the impact of Chevron that it impacts us daily, right? And I'm thinking of planting cempasúchil there to harvest for our annual Dia de los Muertos, right? Including a meditation healing space where, because we have a creek that, like Berkeley, we have a creek, and it might even be the same creek that runs through our campus as well. And how serene that is, and providing that serenity, right? that we say we want to address students' mental health and holistically serve. This is a way to do that within the spirit of interconnection, within the spirit of servingness on an HSI campus. And in collaboration with our local tribe community, saying a land acknowledgement with all of that means different than just reading it as an agenda item to check off. And so for me, decolonizing HSIs definitely consists of connecting the dots between whose schooling and education was intended for and who was kept out. And, I'm thinking of Sylvia Mendez from Mendez versus Westminster and the Little Rock Nine and all the reservation board school children, right? There are definitely dots to connect between who these U.S. settler colonial institutions of schooling kept out and the inequitable outcomes, academic outcomes for the excluded students that we continue to see in HSI equity reports across the country year after year. It's the same data. Doesn't matter the segment, doesn't matter the state, it's the same data when you look across, and it's coming from the same communities. How about the role, disrupting colonial logic is also addressing, what about the role of white women in forced assimilation of Native children, right? In reservation boarding schools. And the current statistics that school teachers, especially at the K through 12 level, continue to be overwhelmingly white women. While the majority of U.S. school students are still BIPOC, especially at HSIs, those are, having those conversations is what disrupts the logic, because you first have to get to there's so much to unlearn before you can do that, and in practice, the question of, well, what does it look like in practice? First and foremost, what it looks like in practice is that you are definitely interrupting, disrupting, transforming the normalized status quo, the business as usual practices, policies, procedures, as well as the historical campus culture. And we have to address the culture of an institution as well in terms of how it can either support or become an obstacle to servingness. It looks like openly challenging and providing critical self-reflection at a campus-wide level as an HSI for the institutional and systemic disproportionate educational equities that continue to still be experienced by our Raza students despite the HSI grants, right? And so I mentioned we're on our third HSI grant, over 10 years, 12 million, yet our most recent student equity report showed that our Raza students are disproportionately impacted on transfer and completion. Now, how is this outcome still on our Raza students when per our student equity, they're successfully enrolling, they're successfully passing their transfer level math and English classes, they're successfully persisting, but yet at the point of transfer and completion, they're disproportionately impacted, right? What's going on there? And we can't make it student deficit focus. We have to do the self-reflection. I use a Tezcatlipoca. We have to clear the smoke in the mirror to see what is really going on. And sometimes, that there's smoke and things that distract from really addressing that. Because at every level, these academic outcomes are unacceptable at an HSI, especially 10 years and $12 million, third grant out, disrupting. So again, disrupting colonial logic requires that you're asking the difficult and sometimes uncomfortable questions that shift the focus and the responsibility of student outcomes onto the institutional, historical, campus culture, the normalized practices, the policies, programming, and procedures of the HSI campus. It looks like speaking of student outcomes and the disproportionate equities via a self-reflection lens, right? What is the institution, the departments, the programs, the classrooms, et cetera? What are we doing or not doing in regards to intentional HSI servingness for Raza students? Are the programs and services offered, the resource and funding provided at an institutional, at a programmatic level, equitably distributed and representative of our student population, right? For me, disrupting colonial logic is definitely tied also to the power of language that requires that we flip the script, right? To counter that student deficit mindset and the narrative that is very prevalent in US settler colonial institutions of schooling, right? Where It's the students that are at risk. They're low income. They're underprepared, right? It's very easy. Oh, they don't come to class, right? It's very easy to look outward. And so, for example, the language, right? Counter minority with minoritized, right? Underprepared students to underprepared HSI colleges, admin, faculty, and staff. Right? Shift imposter syndrome from the student to the culture of the historical institutional exclusion of entire BIPOC student populations from US schools, right? That's disrupting colonial logic. To continue to focus on students for the educational inequities being experienced is a function of student deficit mindset, and so therefore disrupting it in practice, you have to include that critical self-reflection to what we're doing, what we're not doing. Is there campus-wide as well as departmental strategic planning for program and services intentionally designed for Raza students? Are our Raza students seeing themselves reflected and equitably represented in our diverse hires, especially in admin and faculty who are theoretically grounded in the HSI research and best practices, right? That was my hermano, Michael Benitez. He added that. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. It's not enough to be brown. It's, because, the Nahor tells us all skin folk and kin folk. So there's wisdom in those teachings. Is our curriculum across discipline culturally responsive, inclusive of best pedagogical practices with HSI research? Are we being intentional and unapologetic in centering HSI within our professional development to support our admin, our faculty and staff in the best interest advancing HSI servingness for Raza students, right? These are all the questions whose responses have an impact in the educational experiences and the academic outcomes of Raza students at HSIs. And we see that over and over again in our equity reports. How it also looks like in practice to me, and this gets to a deeper layer, right? It's like, coming to have learned to understand and know that racial politics and the racial Olympics at many campuses, including HSIs and in larger society, are clear manifestations of the Eurocentric white supremacy strategy of divide the collective strength and power and unity to conquer, right? In addition, I have come to learn and understand and see how the racial politics within HSI campus serve as a distraction away from really addressing the historical institution and systemic root causes to the educational equities experienced by Raza students. And it's absolutely just completely counterproductive to the goals and missions of servingness at an HSI. And it becomes an obstacle to creating genuine institutional transformation, collaborative working, multiracial, multi-ethnic solidarity, right? And creating positive change in the advancement of student servingness at an HSI. Paulo Freire also in Pedagogy of Oppressed, right, gives us another understanding of the pedagogy of the oppressed and how groups are sometimes pitted against each other. And so having this understanding, right, from this framework, one way that I disrupt colonial logic through practice is that I don't engage in racial politics. And that is my way of not engaging in disrupting the colonial logic and of divide and conquer, and which is why my HSI servingness advocacy is always addressing the historical, the institutional, the systemic concerns and practices, and never the personal. It also, disruption of colonial logic and practice includes for me ancestral wisdom and indigenous philosophy and teachings from within academic spaces, whether it's in my classroom or counseling sessions or campus meeting. In all aspects within an institution, there's great value in advancing students' servingness from the framework of Enlakesh, you are my other me, and Sankofa of reaching back and how the past informs the present. And in those critical self-reflections, shift the conversations within academic spaces, right? It also is a way and a means for me to affirm and reclaim non-Eurocentric funds of knowledge within the institution. Disrupting colonial logic and practice always looks like having an altar space in my office. And I'm absolutely the one that sages my office and my classroom and the entire counseling department lobby and our department space at the beginning of each semester, and I believe in that prayer, and I connect that prayer to to whose occupied land we are on, and the spirits that have been in that land. And so for me, it's important to do that. And and some of these things don't have to be publicized, right? They're personal, right? Another way I disrupt colonial logics and practices in regards to what is considered professional and appropriate work attire. And so for me, sometimes it's me and my hair in trenzas, wearing my rebozo and huaraches to work in conferences, right? Other days, it looks like a thick black winged eyeliner with hoop earrings, And then there's those days that I'm the one walking out into a campus meeting with fresh white sage from my home that I planted, grow, and harvest myself in one hand and my lavender oil in another. And I'm calling in spirits if I'm walking into a meeting with my sage. Oh,
spirits, help me with this meeting.
Yes. I'm like, creator, don't make me show out.
Not today, colonizers.
Not today. And lastly, just to be a little bit more recent, in regards to the professional work attire piece, during 2023 commencement, I was one of the faculty reads for the graduates. And so, I was on stage and thinking of that space and thinking of us being an HSI and the struggles of being in a servingness, again, things just come to me, I'm driving or whatever. And so I chose to wear my traditional Purepecha regalia of gala that's intended only for special occasions and ceremonies, And so I'm talking the fondo underneath the pleated skirt with the mandil that's bordado by hand. I'm talking the ribbons and braids in my hair, my rebozo that my grandmother gave me, and yes, I included the master's hood and I included my undergraduate cap from when I walked the stage at Chicano grad at Berkeley, because for me, it's all interconnected. They're all different links of the same chain. And so I thought of that. And so I wore that. And honestly, I was a little nervous, but I remembered my lineage and I walked in there and it was just an active way of me disrupting Eurocentrism and decolonizing what is considered professional and appropriate ceremonial commencement attire at an HSI serving 47% of our students. Raza, right? And San Pablo, where we're at, is 56.5% Raza, and Richmond next is 44%. And so for me, most important, it was showing up in our authentic selves and unapologetically embracing all our intersecting identities as faculty within an HSI is paramount. And respect to the representation for students, for families, and the communities we serve. Disrupting a logic is that even if I'm on that stage, yes, that was me staying seated for the Pledge of Allegiance, which is another example of me. And honestly, that act of disrupting, I've been doing that since high school and getting in trouble for it. So ain't nothing changing there, And so again, thinking back, like those are the ways, right? It's under the ways that disruption can happen in practice on a personal level, right? And then also at a larger level, and in a level that's impactful for the community. And and my hope is that for next graduation, more and more faculty will bring their authentic traditional, because you see it in the audience. I saw it in the students' families. I saw it in their caps and gowns. So individually, students and families. And so the more we reflect that, the more we open up space that it is appropriate and that you do belong and that this is a place for you. And yes, your traje de ware does belong on a graduation stage in the US, and so those things are, that's what I was thinking of and how, in my attire being a disruption for colonial logic and practice.
Woo! I'm gonna have to listen to this 3 times to get all of the beautiful things you shared. So thankful for you to talk to us really about the embodiment of decolonizing a campus, right? You just talked about embodying it, which in many ways means that some people are never going to be able to do it. Like you can't,
Yes,
if you can't embody it.
Yes, no.
If you can't embody it, then you ain't gonna do it.
And you can't fake the funk either.
Nah. So there's that too, right? That like you just said a lot of things and gave us a lot to think about, right? As far as decolonization in practice. But yeah, some of it is like, it's just your authentic self. This is you. This is your way of being. This is your way of knowing. You're the embodiment, right, of decolonizing the campus. You just showing up is decolonizing the campus. So I want to acknowledge that, right? I think that's important for us to acknowledge that some of this is like, it's just, and I think it gets to the point of like why we need to hire folks like you, right? Like why we need to have people who reflect the students' identities in HSI campuses, because we know the numbers show us that they don't.
Yes, yes.
And particularly in faculty numbers, they're dismal.
Absolutely.
So the students who, the people who students have to interact with, which is faculty, you have to interact with faculty, don't look like them, don't talk like them, aren't like them in any sort of way.
In any way.
In any sort of way. So yeah, so thank you for sharing all of that. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about is specific pedagogy, because you talk about, I'm actually going to drop in the show notes the article that you shared with me, published in Berkeley Extension, so people can read it and learn more about you. But you talk about online classes and how online classes, you learned a lot from both being a student in online classes and now teaching and serving students in online ways. And this is important, I think, topic, because the community colleges in California, what I've come to understand in recent times is there's still a lot of online, right? There's still an imbalance almost, right? Like 60% online still. And so I think there needs to be a whole episode just on that. It's like, how do we decolonize the online practices, right? How do we serve students through an HSI lens in the online setting? So yes, I have not had deep conversations with anybody about that. So what are your thoughts on what you learned?
First and foremost, foundationally, I learned that as a faculty, we have to have continuous PD on online instruction to support our own pedagogical teaching practices in that online environment. We were required to do the Becoming an Effective Online Instructor training, which was a week, and it was great, right? I think it was a month, and it was great. But them one-shot deals don't work. And anyway, so the continuous, right? And oh my goodness, beyond the pedagogical practices piece, it takes so much time to prepare just the right online Canvas show and the assignments and the discussions that's inclusive of varied forms of engagement strategies, right? That centers equity in student learning, and that's culturally responsive within an HSI campus, right? So that's foundationally I definitely learned that, because like I mentioned earlier, like I've never really been an online person pre-COVID. And so, but in regards to pedagogical practices, because I did end up having to teach online, I definitely learned the value of that weekly engagement between students to students, professors to students. It's so important for not feeling as if you're just going through the motions of a class teaching yourself. And, and I say that as a faculty member, and I say that as a student, because I was in those postgrad certificates during COVID. And so I was a student at the same time that I'm trying to figure out how to teach online. So I definitely pulled from my professors as for tips there. I learned the value pedagogically of making weekly videos where I introduce the unit and I provide a mini lecture and I review the assignments due for the week and I discuss the readings. I really just do what I would have done in the classroom, but I record myself and it takes forever because I keep on messing up. But again, it's part of that engagement thing. I learned that it's critical to have a consistent weekly routine followed so that students know what to expect and is due each week, right? Where each week has the same structure. Like, for example, for me, modules are published Mondays, student discussions are due Wednesdays, and the reading journals due Sundays, right? And so that does require us on the back end to be organized and prepared and just to have our stuff checked off so that the students can then be supported in the best way that they can with us being organized. I've definitely incorporated the use of student personal videos and music uploads as much as possible, and incorporating social media and TikToks and things like that. There's the social media aspect to it, but there's a lot of teaching stuff and a lot of nuggets of wisdom and gems that can be found even through memes, things like that. And so incorporating that as much as possible to personalize the assignments and to provide more of a human interaction. I remember the first year I taught online, The introduction was a discussion, right? Answer question, upload a picture. You know, the second time I taught, no, record yourself in a video so I could hear your voice and see, you know, mannerisms and look at the setting that you're in, you know. And so again, that evolving, adding, you know, and so those are my takeaways from the online teaching environment. And while I'm still partial to in person, I definitely have grown to see the benefit and the value and the convenience and the necessity of an online teaching environment for students and faculty as well, right? And there's for so many beneficial reasons. And so, yeah, it's definitely not going away. And so I think that a focus on intentionality in online teaching training within the context of an HSI is definitely, you know, a next step, right? Or fruit to, what do they call that? Low-hanging fruit?
Yes. Oh, people love the low-hanging fruit in HSIs too. Like that's always like, you know, we came up with 20 recommendations, but only 5 of them were low-hanging fruit. So we went with those. I'm like,
yeah,
you should really think about the 15 that are much deeper,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Get into the weeds, right? Like get up, climb the tree, you know, like see what's up there because there's a lot to do. So thank you for sharing. And I'm like, ooh, okay, I'm definitely gonna pay attention if I have to teach an online course, which I think I will have to do next semester. So because I've never done it, and it's like, yeah, like there is techniques that you have to learn to like actually engage students in that setting.
You know, and honestly, what helped me improve was the technicality piece was the online campus faculty BEOI online training, right? It was taught by colleagues who are professional, you know, experts in that. Excellent in the you know, technical piece of it, but in terms of like the humanizing piece, it was being a student. It was being a student during online student during COVID. That's what really helped me. Because I was living through it, right? I was going through those steps. And I think that that's the piece that we can't speak on something if we haven't experienced it. And so, yeah, that was very valuable for both doing the training by faculty who already were doing it, you know, even pre-COVID, you know, we had online instruction. But then that combined with being a student was a really good blend to really help inform what I did with my own classes.
Yes, for sure. We have spent a lot of time training folks in online settings. And I was with one community college recently, and they said, we have a lot of training on online teaching, but we don't have a lot of training in the stuff you're talking about, right? Like the pedagogical practices for engaging Latine students, right? Like that. And I was like, wow, that's powerful, right? Like what we provide training on actually says a lot about what we care about, right? So that was a really important like piece of feedback that somebody had given me. So another thing I wanted to talk to you about is this idea of grassroots leadership, because I would say you're definitely somebody that practices from the grassroots. In the book Transforming HSIs for Equity and Justice, I talk about our grassroots leaders as doing the most HSI activism on campus. And the idea of grassroots leadership is that it's not the highest level leaders on campus. It's not your presidents, your deans, but it's like folks who are, the people are on the ground, right? Our gente who are actually committed to serving the students, right? The folks. So what techniques have you used as a grassroots leader on campus to advance servingness on your campus?
You know, and this is a beautiful question because, you know, again, I'm bringing in other voices because there's so many teachings beyond academic theory, right? And I'm thinking of Mama Audre Lorde's wisdoms, like for the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house, right? And if we're only looking to institutional policy procedure to change the outcomes, that's never going to happen. And so definitely that grassroots leadership. And so in terms of, you know, techniques, first and foremost, you know, being the rebels and the resistors of conformity, right? The disruptors of the business as usual and the historical campus culture, that challenges, that questions the status quo, right? That addresses and speaks truth to power, that's always grounded in students, families, and communities. In the advocacy, right? That's a technique that's core, and that requires courageous leadership, right? It also requires that you're grounded and what you are saying, and you're saying it's coming from a good place, right? Staying silent only serves to enable and to be complicit with the continued institutional practices, and so the being vocal is important. At institutional level, like I utilize data and research in all my advocacies, right? It's like you can't just go out on the streets without knowing. You got to know what you're saying. You having your talking points, and for me, that's data, that's research, that's bringing in the transformation, where the articles that I bring to academic senate. It's that piece. It's interesting, how data is so utilized in so many state mandated reports, yet it's often underutilized and not informing decisions at the local level, at a campus-wide level, at a department level. Lastly, I also just use the technique of no is just a word, and I will hustle. If I get a no, all right, I will do what it takes, and I will jump through whatever hoops you make me jump through, because that is the institutional way. But I'm gonna do this because I know it's what our community deserves, right? And so for me, the persistence paid off with my current project, and this is my baby right now. So the documentary American Homeboy, it explores the history and the racialized origins of Cholo and Pachuco culture, the suits, and the resulting criminalization of lowriding, right? That made lowriding illegal in California and many cities in California, and since then, there's been a lot of advocacy across many cities to where there was eventually a lowrider statewide holiday last year for the first time in the state of California in Sacramento. And then January 1st, Governor Newsom signed a bill overturning the criminalization of banning in California. And so for me, screening, and this documentary came out just August of 2023, so it's all recent, right? And I went to see the screening at Brava Theater in the Mission, and saw the Frisco Finest Car Club was out there, and I'm sitting there, I'm like, I need to bring this to our community, right? And so the grassroots piece of the framework and how we're organizing it is that I'm working collaboratively across academic and CTE disciplines with La Raza Studies and automotive services. We're working across instruction and student services with inclusion of EOPS and DSPS. So in doing so, from a grassroots framework, we are disrupting that traditional institutionally embedded silos that could divide us, and that is common within a U.S. college structure, right? In addition to that disrupting the campus, the silos within the campus, we're engaging the community by being very intentional and strategic in how we're inviting from on campus, who we're inviting from on campus, right? We're focusing on Raza Studies and automotive first, and then the campus community, right? Who we're inviting from our feeder high schools, right? We're intentionally inviting the ethnic studies and the automotive programs and the Raza clubs at the high schools, right? And the grassroots community that we're engaging will go beyond an email invite and have us in the classrooms making presentations. We're going to the feeder high schools, right? We're connecting with teachers and clubs advisors. We're having a Dreamers conference on campus next week. We're going to be promoting it there, right? So it requires more than just being behind a computer screen. And so that's the piece of community organizing for me, and grassroots organizing is that you go beyond what has always been. You go outside that box and you create your own reality. And and pedagogically speaking, and not only that, we're having the director and some of the cast members do a Q&A after the documentary screening. And so for me, pedagogically, I always ground in how can I connect what's happening inside the classroom to outside, to relevant real world, to how can I engage the two. And so, and how can I bring to life the content, the theory, the topics that we discuss in a classroom, right? How can we bring that to life? And so for me, more that grassroots community engagement piece is where all those worlds are connecting for me with American Homeboy, because my own personal connections with various car clubs over the years is the cultural wealth that I'm personally bringing to this event, right? Where we're having a special invite lowrider shine and show car show with 4 of our local Richmond, San Pablo car clubs. Shout out to Contra Costa, to Escándalo, Just Lowriders, and to Brotherhood Bay Area, right? And we're gonna have a show and show an hour before the documentary screening, right? And and being genuine and authentic. This wouldn't happen without my personal connection, right? And regardless of my title and my position and the degrees that I have, right? It's happening as a result of me being from the community, in the community, with my community, and actively engaged in that. And so there's much wisdom to be learned in regards to HSI servingness from that personal, that lived community engagement experience that comes from the faculty and the admin and the staff that are actively engaged, right? And the best thing HSIs can do is to fully support those individuals, because they have what it is you're doing, but adding those obstacles really makes it difficult to move things forward. So for me, that's the grassroots, right? It's intersectional, it's interracial, it's collaborative, it's done in community. There's no hierarchy, right? You engage, you know, and you bring to life. And to me, that's what HSI servingness is. And I think, you know, it's a little dated. But the Raza Studies professor in me is thinking of the 1969 El Plan de Santa Barbara's analysis and positions by the Chicano Coordinating Council on higher education, right? And how much insight and wisdom is in that. That's completely relates to current day HSI advocacy. And, you know, feel free to exchange the word Chicano for whatever label, right, your institution is using. But in the section that says the university and the Chicano community within El Plan de Santa Barbara reads, what we are demanding is nothing less than to use the university resources, which we ourselves have given directly and indirectly to the university. For decades, Chicanos have supported, through taxation of our income and exploitation of our labor, institutions of higher education. In return, we have received virtually nothing. Indeed, the university has contributed mightily to the oppression of our people by its massive one-sided involvement in agribusiness, urban dictation, dislocation, and war, as well as by its admissions and employment policies. Now, I read that and I think university resources, is that not current HSI funds? Which we ourselves have given directly or indirectly to the university. Is that not our current Raza student enrollment at HSIs? In return, we have received nothing. Is that not the disproportionate and inequitable educational outcomes still being experienced by Raza students at HSIs despite the millions of dollars, right? How many colleges and universities are currently oppressing pro-Palestinian students and voices and causes and are inequitable in their diverse admin faculty hires and in regards to HSI student representation, right? So is that about employment practices, right? And so we're still advocating for these same things in 2024 that were fought for in 1969. We're just calling it HSI servingness within academia now.
That part.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for bringing in the Plan de Santa Barbara. I had this dream article I wanted to write before that never got published. It got rejected multiple times about how Chicano studies and the Plan and Chicano students are the reason we are HSIs. And I think I didn't.
Oh, okay, it sounds like we cook something. Co-writing something, man.
We can cook that up because it's true, right? Like, because my
Yes.
thing has always been that HSIs, like I always like push back when people say we accidentally became an HSI. I said, no, you didn't. You had students who were banging on the door. Students have been banging on the door
East LA
forever.
Blowout, the high school students in East LA, pre-next studies at San Francisco State, for Mexican American teachers, asking for Mexican history, you know, so yes, absolutely, yes. And again, for the people, by the people. But why? Because the Department of Ed all of a sudden created this designation with money attached. Now we think that's the origin story? No.
It's not. It's just the normative story, right? It's the mainstream story. It's the neoliberal story. It's not the actual story. So yeah, let's loop back to that, because that that was years ago that I had when I was first a little baby doc student, or maybe first year assistant professor, that I just couldn't like get it into academia, right? Like it got rejected multiple times, and I ran out of energy for it.
You know, and I want to And in this, I also want to give credit, where credit is due, because so much of where I'm at now in my journey, right, compared to, I'm in my 25th year in community college, right? So compared to 1999 and 2000, Lorena, right, absolutely, hands down, enormously impactful. Tucson's Chito, right, with the Mexican American Studies program that was happening with the Chicanx Institute for Teaching and Organizing, right? Precious Knowledge, that documentary, if you haven't seen it, check that out, because it talks about that. It's crucial. I've gone to their trainings multiple times. San Jose State has an Institute for Teachers of Color committed to racial justice, and it's between their College of Education and Ethnic Studies in collaboration with UC Riverside's College of Education. Now, again, another training by teachers of color for teachers of color. And it's important that we have our own spaces to really, really address this work. And UC Berkeley mid-90s and education, of course, I was a student under Pedro Noguera, right? And that actually, that course lit the fire for me to go into education. And then in 2021, I was in class every day in person for all of fall 2021 with Jeff Duncan Andrade in the educational equity. So just being present in those spaces, have definitely helped me connect, what is happening in HSIs at a macro level, but also being able to address it at a micro community level because of living in the community and where in that piece. So yeah, it's we get some stuff done.
Yes. I heard that class was really, it still lives on today in the Berkeley School of Ed. That Pedro's class was powerful.
I want to bring up, I taught a unit of it within my Puente curriculum when I was at CSM, because it's such a powerful class. It's such a powerful class to really understanding the gaslighting that happens within education for so many students and us too.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a beautiful conversation, as I knew it was going to be, but we gotta pull it in. And we got one more question that you get to answer. And that question is, ¿Qué pasa, HSIs?
¿Qué pasa, HSIs? Ground yourself in HSI theory and research, student-centered, data-driven decision-making. Sean humildes, pero no dejados. Not all skin folk is kinfolk, so manténgase truchos out there. Okay. Protect your spirit. And lastly, ¿qué pasa? HSIs is aquí estamos y no nos vamos. Así que aguántense. Y con eso, colorín colorado, este cuento se ha acabado.
Y eso es lo que pasa.
Eso es. Así de simple.
Thank you for this. Thank you, my friend, amiga, for being here with me today on ¿Qué pasa, HSIs?